This is something that now is as exciting for me, and I think for a lot of people, as the early days of the web, and that is blockchain technology. And I mean, you've all heard kind of the Bitcoin hype, especially with the price where it is now, like $12,000 a Bitcoin, something like that, and Ethereum and things like that. But what is getting a lot of people excited is actually the data structure and the technology underneath not just cryptocurrencies, but lots of other potential applications for this new kind of thing called a distributed ledger, right? So what is a distributed ledger? Some people say, well, it's just a form of distributed database, right? But it's very different than the kinds of databases that we know about today, right? It's a database that can be run by multiple different parties. It could be run by a group of us here in this room. It could be run by everybody on the whole wide internet. But what it essentially is a write-only log, write-only ledger of transactions that we record, and everybody gets a copy of. And everybody knows the exact order that these things are in. And we can use it to record promises that we make to each other, or trades that we do with each other, or simply things that we want never to disappear, right? And never to be in dispute. And this, on the basis of this, double entry accounting is what helped us build modern society in a way, right? And this, in a way, is not just double entry accounting, it's N entry accounting, where N is as large as the networks that we pulled together. And in order to make this actually trustworthy and verifiable, we need to know that each entry in this ledger is in a specific order, and it's cryptographically connected to the entries before, right? And that's called a Merkle tree. It's some really fun stuff. But it's at its core pretty basic, right? And what was fascinating for me, and the reason why I jumped into this almost exactly a year ago, and why I think a lot of others are getting interested, is this doesn't require a cryptocurrency to work. Right? There are things that are possible when you add a cryptocurrency to it. When you want to do things at the scale of the whole wide internet, then it becomes very useful. But for a lot of different kinds of applications, all you really want to do is pull together a set of participants in an ecosystem. Make sure you can always bring in more, right? Make sure that those boundaries are fairly flexible. But there's a lot of different applications, and to go very quickly through them, there's a company called Cls Bank that's using stuff from the Hyperledger Project, a project called Fabric, to implement a core net settlement system between the major central banks of the world. This is a company most of you have probably never heard of, but they handle $5 trillion a day of instruments, of basically financial instruments between these big central banks. And they'll be building the settlement system for that on top of Hyperledger Fabric. Walmart and IBM are working in China to bring a distributed ledger to trace the supply chain for pork products, so that when there's a foodborne illness, or when there's questions about where did this meat come from, they're able to trace exactly back to the source in a way that is not, everybody implementing to the Walmart API or to the IBM API, but instead to an industry-wide API. The healthcare industry is really interested in blockchain applications because it's a chance to reinvent what has always been a very thorny problem, which is how do we share medical records between organizations and make them as easy to send back and forth as email without it turning into Gmail, without setting up one big central repository of health information that would be either vulnerable to hackers or vulnerable to one company kind of controlling that data set, right? And it's also reinventing a lot of how the energy markets are starting to think about distributed generation, trading of carbon credits. And this, as you've probably seen from some of these examples, is not just a US or Western Europe phenomenon. This is something where these technologies can build these global supply chains, these global projects, and there are global participants in these projects.